Here in this forest, on this hill above the sea, there has always been a well. And the well held the well-being of all. So for centuries the well here had a keeper, a maiden famed for her beauty. She knew she would never marry, for her vows were made to the well-sweet waters, and yet she was never lonely. Finches nested in her hair, and grass snakes coiled around her, like anklets and bracelets of emerald. In the clearness of the water, she saw worlds of wonders, other worlds others could not see. Every day, before the sun's last golden ray, the maiden was tasked to dress the well with flowers. For if the well were not dressed by dusk, some calamity would strike, as once in a distant disaster no one could quite remember. The wondrous well and its waters drew folk from all four corners. They came with wishes, they came with warts, they came with questions and cares and prayers. Some with sore heads and some with sore hearts. The sick came to cleanse their bodies, and mothers to wash blood from newborn babes. Warriors came to wash their wounds, but found themselves so deeply soothed that they laid down their warriors' ways and their weapons as a gift to the waters. For all gave the whispering well their thanks. Some gave flowers, some gave songs, some dropped silver coins into the waters and saw them turn into glistening scales. For deep in the wet of the well, it was said, coiled a giant serpent, feared and revered, whose scales glittered green and silver, and whose eye winked bright from the deep, deep darkness. And the well was a wellspring of music. Musicians drew sounds from the well's deep mouth, and some even gifted their instruments, flutes and bells and deer-screamed drums. But one ancient instrument was never played, an ancient horn grown over now with moss and ivy. None could remember how it came there, but legend said its music could bring the beasts and burst flowers into bloom, and bring the help of a mighty hunter. Elsewhere a hand held another horn, a drinking horn. A local lord sat with his huntsman friends, swinging from the horn of a beast he had slaughtered. This bear of a man, this boar of a man, boasted of the beasts he'd bested. Their heads hung like prizes on his walls. He could have any head he wanted, even the well-keeper's maidenhead. He would sniff her out and hunt her down and teach her what it meant to be a woman. Heady with drink and the heat of the hunt, he climbed to the well in the heart of the forest as the sun began to sink. There sat the maiden, coiled in tiny snakes, dressing the well with fragrant flowers. He grabbed her by the wrists, but she writhed away. He grabbed her by the hair, and an owl flew out, and then he grabbed her by the throat. He would have her, even if it killed her. But the tiny snakes coiled round his throat, and she broke free, and looked to the weapons around the well, glittering gold in the setting sun, and she plucked out a dagger, but he grabbed it from her, and she heaved up a sword, but he turned it on her. The weapons glinting blood-red now in the dying light, and she grabbed instead the ancient horn, and she pulled it to her lips to blow what she thought her dying breath. But before she could, the last of the light left the leaves of the trees, as the sun sank down into the sea. It was dusk, and the well was not dressed. And the well began to bubble, and the well began to swell, and up from the darkness, up from the deep came the giant serpent, silver, ancient, a jewel as an eye and a knife as a jaw. Up it rose dripping from the well, ripping through moss and crumbling stone, and the waters rose, swelling up, bursting the walls of the well. And the man ran as fast as ever a man can, as the foaming waters of the well chased him all the way down the hill. to the village, where the man cried that the maiden had failed, forgotten her duty, brought a curse upon the world. The maiden tried to stop the water, but the waters kept flowing, rising, till the water filled the forest and drowned the land below. And she found herself floating through the submerged forest, the horn still in her hands. And she sounded the call, but the horn slipped from her and drifted down. Beneath her swam the silver snake, and soon the forest swayed with seaweed, and she started whirling, in a swirling glass bowl with a face agape stretched round it. And she whirled and swirled until she was suddenly still, drifting down slowly through the deep. And she saw a frozen iridescent king, and from his mouth swam bronze dolphins. She saw a palace of pearl and a palace of bone, and she knew inside were shimmering doors and infinite corridors to other worlds. And beside her water foamed and roared with a herd of water horses. And the salt sea water drained away, and the horses shook sea from their gleaming manes, and the trees shook drops from their mossy arms, and the herd of horses moved towards an antlered man in the dripping glade. He was sat upon a fine black horse, and underneath his antlers 3 faces slowly turned. And the water snake, shrinking, coiled round his waist. And the antlered man took up his horn, and he raised it up to the forest sky, and he blew a sound that would bring beasts and burst flowers into bloom. And from all 4 corners wolves came running, and the horse herd all came running too, and the antlered man and all his beasts like a storm thundered into the forest. The maiden felt suddenly all alone in the stillness and the strangeness. She knew she was in another world, a world warmer than the one she'd left. In the distance bellowed great horned beasts, not heard in her world for thousands of moons, aurochs. And she felt herself older, no longer a maiden, a woman. As she walked on, she heard water, and her heart burst open with the song of the spring she'd once tended, but far older, before it was marked with stone. And she heard the distant crack of burning trees, and she looked down to settlements, to the trails of scorched land and severed stumps, reaching up to the sacred spring black-fingered. She sank to her knees before the spring and drank deeply, sweetly from it. And as she had always done before dusk, she thanked the well with flowers and song. When night came, the antlered man returned. He came close to the maiden, strong in his shadow, but she was not afraid. The snake round his waist wound down to the ground and shed its skin, and grew and coiled round the clearing. And in that great green circle, the antlered man held out the ancient horn, and when she took it in her hands, it burst with blooms of flowers and fruit. And she and the serpent fell asleep, into a sleep so very deep that they slept there for hundreds and hundreds of years, till the damp green moss grew from their skin, and the roots of trees wrinkled over them. All around them settlements grew, till all the land was burned and ploughed, and the ancient forest a fairy tale, save for the serpent circle. A woodsman climbed to the top of the hill. He found this strange green circle still full of trees fine for felling, He stubbed his toe, then kicked the log, not knowing it the sleeping woman. Rudely awoken, the woodwoman rose up from her roots, age-old now, wrinkled like ancient bark, fungi on her skin and beetles in her hair. All around were autumn trees, hung with apples, pears, chestnuts, blood-red berries. An apple dropped into her hand, round and gold as the sun, and she held it out to him. But the woodsman was not looking. He had seen the trees he'd fell, the sacred spring he would make a well, and the ancient horn he would have as his own. And he took out his whittling knife to mark a giant twisting root, but it was the sleeping serpent, and the wood began to bleed. Up it rose, writhing in powerful coils, and the earth shook and rumbled, and all the trees trembled, as if in a mighty storm. The woodsman lashed out, slashed with his knife, and suddenly the snake dissolved in 1,000 fragments, each an owl or bird of the night, of screech and howl, and all swooped into the tops of trees. And round the night birds span, weaving over and over their delicate net, talking to other invisible places, weaving a slow spell round the well to keep it always safe somewhere, if not here. The woodsman ran back to the village, babbling about the witch of the well and her fork-tongued dragon, a waterhole knucker that could uproot the forest and ruck up the whole of the earth. And the cattle bellowed as if bewitched. So the villagers came up the hill to do battle with blazing torches to burn the witch, to fight dragon fire with fire. The screech owls swooped around their heads, warding them off with wings and hootings, but still the villagers marched on, with flames in their eyes and hands. Once they came to the deep green circle, they found themselves too afeard to enter, but all round the edges they took torches to trees, until the forest flamed. The heat hurt so hot, so the serpent slithered down the spring to the cool beneath. But the woman sat still in the circle's centre. Time sped into the future, and over the fire raged and raised the forest, the blaze burning everything black, the blackened fingers stretching out till the wellspring almost dried. And over the well, the ancient woman raised her hand,
and the serpent rose up on its coils, up, spitting water. And as if the world turned upside down, the rains began. The sky split in two with the silver snake of lightning, flashing and slashing through angry crowds. Hissing steam curled up in coils, till the deluge drowned the flames. But the woman was not finished. With fury in her fingertips, she raised her hands to drown the world, and the gushing waters rose till they joined the sea, flashing all away in their roaring wake, and the settlements were washed away like bark floating lost on a tide.
And the ancient woman sank back down to the quiet places still and secret, trickled back in rivulets to the deep, deep pools beneath our feet. But if you